I sat there thinking about strange portents and swirling cosmic warnings, the sun darkening and the stars falling. I was thinking about light, waxing and waning, and I had just read the line, "The powers in the heavens will be shaken." And I was sitting with this disorienting feeling that this passage from Mark's gospel always brings me, a sense of not knowing quite which way's up or what is to happen next. But before I could make too much of that feeling, I remembered for the first hearers of Mark's gospel, that disorientation, it wasn't metaphorical. It was their lived experience. Scholars date Mark's gospel to around 70 CE, right as the Jerusalem temple had fallen. So the people had watched what they thought would last forever collapse into rubble. For them, the sun really had gone dark. Their world, be it political, spiritual, emotional, was cracking wide open. And they were asking, where is God? What's happening? And into that moment of chaos, Mark writes these words. This passage, as you can imagine, is sometimes called the Little Apocalypse. But it isn't a countdown to the world's end. It's a pastoral word. It's a pastoral word to a community that is in crisis, a call to endurance, to watchfulness. So when Jesus says, the sun will darken, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall, he borrows language from the prophets, those like Isaiah and Joel. And he's pulling this apocalyptic tradition as resistance tools for his people. It was a grammar of people who had seen empires rise and empires fall. It said, even when the visible order collapses, God's steadfastness holds. The systems, the structures, the stars around us might seem to be falling, but God's got us in God's hands. Now, I was sitting with all of that, letting it kind of work on me, and then Karen Collins walked into my office, and she was lit up, as she so often is. She was excited, and I was drawn in. Now, Karen, as many of you know, is a master teacher, and she's a former elementary school principal. God save her. Some of my favorite conversations with Karen just get into the weeds of lesson planning. We're just two happy teachers chitty-chatting. Anyhow, in retirement, she's a museum educator at the Met. Really cool gig. Now that day she was preparing a museum tour for high school seniors. She described to me the artwork that she planned to show them. The very first piece on her list was Monet's Rouen Cathedral, one of the canvases from his long, obsessive project of trying to capture the light. Now, Monet painted that cathedral over and over and over again, more than 30 times, in fact, in 2 years. He painted it at dawn, in midday, in fog, under winter skies, with golden sun hitting the stone like fire. He watched and he waited to catch the light and to see how even solid stone could seem to shift and move. Across all of these canvases, he showed the same structure, the same lines, the same solid cathedral. It could, by the presence of light, by the absence of light, just seem to become something else, something new, something sparkling and almost impermanent, something surprising, to be sure. Now, Karen planned to walk the students really up close to the painting and ask them, "What do you see?" Up close, they would notice the bright and bold flecks of color, pinks and blues and purples. These are blotches you would not think belong on a cathedral at all. But then she planned to ask them to step back and from there take another look. From that vantage point, a sort of beige tone emerges. It almost shimmers. The colors blend, and it gives this single impression. To take it one step further, she planned to ask the students, what if this had been painted in the dark? What would happen to your perception of the place then? How would it be different? And it struck me there in that moment with Karen, Monet was painting the feeling that Mark 13 gives. Mark's words, with suddenness, flick off the lights for our world. The structures, they haven't changed. We are where we were, but the light seems to have disappeared, the path forward gone away. The familiar, it can even feel foreboding. What we thought we could count on, well, it looks different. It feels different to us. And so we begin to ask, what's happening? What is God up to? What am I supposed to do here? Mark writes from a historical moment when people were exhausted and vulnerable and on edge, living through a long era of violence and uncertainty. And Jesus is describing what happens when old powers are collapsing. He says, false prophets will rise up and they'll promise easy answers. When the world feels like it's tilting and the future is unclear, instead of cowering in hopelessness or cynically just closing our eyes to it, Jesus instructs us, watch. Watch. Now, I don't think, to be clear, that Jesus is encouraging an anxious, on-edge hypervigilance, one that's fueled by fear and one that just exhausts the soul. He isn't inviting us into a panic. He's drawing us in to discernment, into a posture of deep awareness of what's happening. When eras shift, like right now, and when people become aware of just how fragile we are, we can be especially susceptible to being misled, to quick fixes on the offer, to false comforts, to claims that a new age has come, when in actuality, suffering is ongoing and the status quo of systemic oppression remains in place. Jesus warns the disciples, but also us. Don't be naive. Jesus doesn't want us to confuse the sign of things shaking up with the arrival of salvation. Slow down. Settle into the darkness. Watch. What do you see? We don't know the day or the hour, Jesus says. True. But we can learn how to watch for the divine interruption of oppression, of hate, of hurt. We can learn how to hear the truth from among all the lies, either when it whispers to us softly or when it hollers out. We can learn how to catch the light on the horizon, holding on to hope. Now, I was thinking about who we could look to, who could teach us how to navigate this type of darkness, who's learned how to hold on to a kind of hope, even as the shadows stretch and answers don't come quick enough to clear the way. Someone who can discern the difference between fluorescent falsehoods and the truth of divine sparks. So I thought of Qassam Waled. He's a 28-year-old physicist and Palestinian who's lived his whole life in Gaza. Now, I admit, I've kind of fallen a little bit in love with this young physicist. He's so much more than a scientist. He's a romantic and he's a poet. He's also, in a very real sense, a prophet in our time. His words cry out from the wilderness, from the darkness, and they can help us find the way. Qassam writes and speaks with earned wisdom about how, by design, he and all other Gazans exist in darkness, in a box, as he describes it, a cage. This works as metaphor, certainly, but it also applies to reality. They depend on Israel for whatever limited electricity they have. And for the last 2 years, as we know, they have lived virtually without it, relying on scarce solar power. But Gazans are cut off from natural light, too. He explains Gaza isn't the best place to observe the night sky because we have more than 90% air pollution from the bombings. Qassam understands how to live, trusting in the light's presence, even when it cannot be seen. But here's the thing. He points to the stars, the ones that he can barely see, as being the birthplace of his calling. He also points to them as a constant reminder of life beyond the edge of darkness, beyond the bars of that cage. When he contemplates the heavens, the expanse of the universe, and all the elemental foundations that hold it together, he is free. No one can dim his imagination. He holds onto that faraway light as sustaining energy. But Qassam has learned how to recognize false prophets, false promises too. On October 16th this year, 6 days after the ceasefire officially went into effect, Qassam said this: "It's the same box. I'm still trapped inside. What are my options now?" he asks. "I don't have a house. I don't have a job. I don't have a life." He explained, "I actually tried to sneak out to my neighborhood a couple of days ago to save some clothes, some winter clothes and some books from underneath the rubble. I went with the first light of morning, and we were shot at by a quadcopter. The ceasefire," he says, "doesn't mean the genocide has stopped. It's just transformed into other shapes, other forms of it. It's the same reality." But he points to the stars, the pinpricks of light that cut through the dark skies, and he says, we need something that is beyond our physical world, something metaphysical, something imaginative, something that can give us a reason. He says plainly, "I do want to live." Friends, we're living in ominous times. And Advent, it's not a season of pretending that everything is fine. Instead, it's a season of learning how to see in the dark. Mark's gospel asks us to stand in the doorway of this, our very changing world, and to look closely at it. What do we see? The old powers are certainly shaking, but new ones haven't arrived. The light of the new day, a new era, is a possibility, but it hasn't dawned. And there are signs of collective resistance, of portents, of real change, but we have no certainty. There's a longing, a deep, aching longing for something different, but we don't have fulfillment yet. And so, yeah, we're in the dark. I know some of us navigate a personal darkness too. Some of us are waiting on test results. Some of us are trying to rebuild after something in our lives have just collapsed. Some of us are navigating grief that comes really early at the holidays. Some of us are exhausted, bone-tired in a way that we don't show on our faces. And some of us are carrying a quiet, private ache that we haven't spoken out loud to anyone. So this Advent, I don't want us to pretend. I don't want us to rush to the light because that's what we think faithful people do. We begin in the dark on purpose because God meets us here. God began here too. So if you are in a murky place or a gray season or a moment when really it doesn't feel like anything is making sense, you are not failing at Advent. You're living it. This is the work of Advent, to adjust our eyes to the long night, to peer into the heavens, holding on to the promise of those faint stars, to trust that something tender is taking shape within us and around us, and even if it's hidden, even if it's small, even if it hasn't taken its first breath yet, it's there. So this Advent, with each other, we'll keep watch. We'll wait, not alone, but together. What are we gonna see? Because the light will surely come.